So first of all, this was really wonderful to be included amongst all of these experts this morning. And I'm here to represent the Department of Art and talk a little bit about how art can also be a puzzle piece that fits into this broader conversation about climate change. And I'll be talking about one specific work of mine that's entitled Spellbreaker Breath Engine, which really focuses on exploring human connection to the environment directly through art. So first I'm going to talk about my own work, Spellbreaker, which utilizes black walnuts as a symbol for addressing issues related to global climate change. Then I will share the work of 5 of my colleagues from the art department who are actively engaging the topic of climate change in really dynamic and inspiring ways. And then lastly, I invite you over the lunch break and also during the poster session to meet me in the Goldthwaite Fuller Library, where I have this artwork set up and you can take an impression of black walnut ink for yourself. So, is climate change real? Obviously, everybody in this room believes so, but as has been mentioned by many of the speakers before me, the public is not always there with us on that. And so, again, art can really bridge the gap between scientific data and research, and opening and engaging questions with people so that they can come to their own assessment of what is happening and where we are at. So in homeopathy, black walnuts are considered to be spellbreakers of heredity and the environment. That's kind of my starting point, this idea of a spellbreaker of the current environmental crisis we're in. But I'm also interested in black walnuts for a lot of other reasons. They are native to Ohio. They absorb a lot of carbon dioxide. There's some really interesting things in herbal culture called the doctrine of signature, which basically says that an herb or plant that looks like a human body part actually is good for that body part. And it's true for walnuts, right? So the husk is like the human head, and then there's a shell like our skull, and the nut looks like our brain. And we know that walnuts are full of omega-3s, so they are really healthy for us. But walnuts are interesting in folklore, medicine, and what's really exciting for me is that they're used in ink and dye. They can be used to make ink and dye, and then that dye can be used as a data visualization to talk about all of those above mentioned things. So I spent a lot of time collecting black walnuts. They're everywhere in Columbus. The trees you will find along the bike trail, and try to dodge them with your wheel. And then to really figure out how to dry them, how to make them into ink, and start experimenting with them in my studio. Then I started trying to figure out how I can engage people with this topic. And so I started out with an interactive drawing system that was loosely based on creating these carbon dioxide graphs. But what I found is that it wasn't really that interactive, because what I had set up for people was so specific, it was kind of boring to move this pole back and forth in the track. And there was just something not very exciting about these carbon dioxide graphs I was sort of replicating. So I got rid of the table and the IV pole for a while, and I wanted to get back to the symbiotic relationship between trees and humans. And so it brought tree stump into the mix, and the tailpipe kind of emphasizes this overuse or overconsumption. And then I added an aquarium pump to the ink so that there's a steady dripping of black walnut ink, and viewers are invited to take a booklet and then keep a drop of that ink for themselves, instead of becoming this drawing that I then hang on the wall. But then, thank you to Tech Hub here at OSU, I received a grant to add a carbon dioxide sensor. So I worked with somebody in the glass department and designed this glass orb that she blew for me. And I really wanted to draw a connection between human breath and that symbiotic relationship between trees and humans, but also emphasize overabundance. So how it works is somebody breathes into this glass orb. That carbon dioxide information from the sensor is sent to an Arduino, which turns on a peristaltic pump, and that then begins dripping the ink into a booklet. So a big part of this project is looking at the artist as facilitator or performer and how engagement happens. And I've been really fortunate to work across campus with different departments. So this is at Chadwick Arboretum for the Arbo Blitz Tree Planting Day. And this is at the Steam Factory for one of their micro lecture evenings. But what's really exciting about being supported by places like this is I get to talk to a lot of people outside of the art department, but still really be true to my art making process. And this broader engagement over climate change. So the thing that I want to emphasize the most in all of this is overabundance, and really that this is more than a symbiotic relationship, but also that people get to take a piece or an impression of their breath with them. Okay, so now I'm going to shift into speaking about some of my colleagues in the art department and how they're engaging climate change in their work. And I apologize, I'm going to read a little bit because I really don't want to misrepresent their work. But this is Cascading Gardens by Professor Ken Rinaldo. And it's a vertical garden that's designed for growing veggies in liminal urban spaces and on tall buildings. They utilize uncared for borders between properties and spur neighbors to share. The water is gravity-fed, bag to bag, collected from the roof and funneled into rain barrels set on robotic timers, where amaranth, cabbages, onions, mint, chives, basil, rosemary, marigolds, and parsley grow in hand-sewn bags made from recycled PET plastic material. Shifting Landscapes, Static Bounds is a work in several places and times. Kelly Bornhoft wrote poetic stanzas for public lands, such as national parks, that point to our unsustainable futures and the role that parks play in glorifying nature as stable sites for preservation for generations to come. The work features thousands of cast rocks collected during Kelly's travels to these sites. She casted the poem in bronze plaques to mimic literature found in parks and brought the plaques to their intended locations. The work questions who has agency to give words in public landscapes, and as the public of these landscapes, how can we resist narratives of stability in a changing climate? This is The Machine for Living Interdependently by Professor Amy Youngs. Composting worms provide efficient disposal services that prevents greenhouse gas production by keeping food and paper wastes out of landfills. The Machine for Living Interdependently is an ecosystem interface that connects a colony of compost worms to a domestic space. And humans participate in this work, in this machine, by rocking in a chair. So you can see that the chair is hooked up to a pump, so when it rocks, then the human is pumping into the system. Site Set Aside is third in a sequence of Professor Michael Mercil's and the Living Culture Initiative artworks located outside the Wexner Center for the Arts, which included the Beanfield and Virtual Pasture. For his final project here, Mercil removed the plot from agricultural production by planting a mix of native grasses and forbs, including goldenrod, purple aster, and wild indigo, to establish a permanent undisturbed carbon storage bank. The work's title, Site Set Aside, refers to a former US agricultural policy requiring farmers to set aside a percentage of their total acreage for conservation uses. And Professor Mercil has a poster here, so if you can, during the poster session, stop by and see that. And lastly, I'll share The Unknown and the Unnamed Interspecies Intimacies by Callista Lyon. Lyon's research with and around the archive investigates the nature-culture narratives of Australian native orchids and their ecological, scientific, and political entanglements. She is interested in revealing the connections between bodies, histories, knowledge, and knowing, reimagining forms of storytelling that might serve non-human and human worlds in our contemporary moment of ecological crisis. So lastly, I just want to, again, thank all of you, the organizers, and everybody that's here for making this a really wonderful opportunity. It's an honor to be here. And again, I hope that you'll visit me down in the Goldthwaite Polar Library and check out my work. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We have one quick question. If there's any.
Question.
Yes.
So as a behavioral scientist, I'm always been interested in the impact of these installations and whatnot on the people who participate. Have you guys ever looked at that or kind of look at if it changes perceptions or intentions in any way by being exposed to that?
It's something that I'm really curious about, and honestly, as somebody whose first goal is as an artist, it's something that's frustrating to me because I don't think that impact can be measured immediately. I think it's something that has to really sit with people for a while, and it's difficult for me to know how that's measured. So, I mean, I can measure maybe data coming into my website, but that doesn't tell me where that's coming from. Yeah, so definitely of interest, but I think also as non-scientists, it's difficult for us to know exactly how to understand what's happening.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.